Good evening and welcome to the Cover One Buffalo podcast. You are joining your host, Greg Thompson. Tonight, I am joined by my friends Adam and Liam, who had the opportunity to represent the Buffalo Bills in the recent Reddit NFL draft mock offseason. And I thought it was a really interesting experience to go through. I've gotten a chance to know Adam and Liam here as active members in the Cover One Slack channel, and thought the work they did here was pretty fantastic. So Adam, Liam, how you guys doing?
Doing all right. How you, Greg?
Really good, Greg.
Cool. Excited to have you guys on here tonight. We kind of talked through this as it was going, and then as it kind of came together, we thought this would be a fun topic to be able to go through. So just to cue it up for the fans that are listening, what this group did is, everybody goes through and sees these mock off seasons that people write articles on The Athletic and on PFF and all these different places, and they're always very repetitive in many of the same candidates and players that people are going after, the same draft candidate players that always seem to fall magically to the third and fourth and fifth round, and the same guys who all get signed for these value contracts. And it's always completely siloed and very focused and centric on just one team. So the thing that I liked about this was, although it's driven by fans, informed fans, people who really know what they're doing in this, it's objective in the fact that there's, over 100 people involved, representatives for every franchise, objective third parties making decisions on the free agents, and then an entire real 7-round active draft. So, tell me a little bit about how you guys got involved in this and where your engagement started with it. We'll start with Liam, but what got you involved in this kind of activity?
Sure. So I started going on Reddit NFL Draft, the subreddit, probably 3 or 4 years ago. I think the first year that I really started paying attention to the draft was the Josh Allen.
You already got haters, so you're obviously doing a good job as GMs. If people are always already chirping at you.
They don't even know what the moves are yet.
Exactly. But I started just with doing the regular. They do mock drafts pretty regularly throughout the off season and even during regular season. But this is my second year of doing this mock off season process, and basically they have a post where people can sign up, and they try to make sure that they get people who know what they're doing and have familiarity with the teams, so that this can be as realistic of a simulation as possible.
How about you, Adam?
Pretty similar. As a pretty long tenured Redditor, I had been on that subreddit quite often. I discovered the Discord later on, just like Liam. I participated in the mock drafts that Liam was talking about. Those are on a smaller scale where you only do, maybe 3 rounds and there's no free agency attached, and those go pretty frequently. Yeah. I think this is also my second time involved in the full mock off season. And just exactly for the reasons you described, it really stands out as a better exercise than just mock drafting versus a machine or something.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously, for anyone who's not aware, we had so many mock drafts that we had to create our own channel in the Cover One Slack channel. We have our own separate channel just to post them and talk through them, and everyone knows how those work. And you can manipulate things with the number of trade downs and trade back ups and trade downs again, and accumulating things, and targeting different people in the same way of playing a video game and restarting until you get the path that you want. This makes it a lot more real because you have other people targeting those same players, other people targeting those same positions, other people on the other end of trade negotiations and things like that. So again, it's not meant to be predictive. This isn't meant to be a projection of what's there, but I think it's a lot more accurate simulation of what is realistic because you have everybody else fighting over a finite and scarce amount of resources. And I really like the way that they approached it. So before we dive into what you did, help me a little bit on what you guys did as far as prep and strategy together as things were leading up. How did you decide whether you were going to go heavier into free agency or really intentionally leave holes that had to be filled in the draft? How did you guys decide you wanted to approach that?
Sure. So first off, I think it was a lot simpler, I will say, for us in the Bills war room compared to some other teams, because it's simpler and more difficult in different ways, because the decision making was very simpler as it was just me and Adam. Whereas a lot of these war rooms, there was teams of people, there'd be people with different positions, like 8-10 guys, and trying to get, figure out what the
They
decision would
literally
be.
have to vote on, what action to take. It's pretty clunky.
Yes,
That's
exactly.
hysterical.
But in terms of priorities, I think we decided that it's about the big three guys on the team, the big three free agents in the big three spots, and we figured we had to address at least one of those in a significant way, and one of them in like at least at minimum a piecemeal way within free agency before getting to the draft. If we could address all three, that would be great, but we wanted to at least minimize the number of holes we had. That was a big key for us.
And then Adam, I know you did a lot of the work on the draft. How was that leaning into influencing who you went more aggressively towards in free agency?
Well, my strong recommendation to Liam was that I had wanted to enter the draft with no needs that were so dire that we would have to violate the tiers in the draft board to accommodate that. And I think we more or less accomplished that. As we'll get into, the only glaring need, I thought, was guard. We addressed the other positions to some extent, some with a lot of money, some with a medium amount. And so, yeah, I think we entered the draft on pretty solid footing.
Excellent. So let's kind of talk through this in the same way that we would any offseason. You guys handled it in the way the structure was done. And for all the listeners and viewers here, we'll get into some of the documents that were created and the prep that you guys did. I was really impressed with the amount that you went through and setting up exactly what you just talked through. And like any other team, you're going to start with retaining their own. So why don't we start with where that leads us into looking at the opportunities you had. So obviously, as you talked about that big three and what you set up, the initial assumption is obviously going to be that we need to be able to, bring back our key players here of, Matt Milano, Daryl Williams, John Feliciano. In the players that you brought back, I only see Daryl Williams' name. So talk me through the guys that you retained and why we don't see John Feliciano and Matt Milano on this list.
Sure. So I'll start with Feliciano because it's a little more simple. I just have a number for John Feliciano that's a lot lower than what I assume the number Feliciano has in his head, and it's lower than the number that at least one other GM in this simulation had. I think I had offered him 3 years, $12 million, and he got 3 years, $24 million. So that was a pretty. He wanted more. He said he wanted more money after he saw our initial offer, and we said, okay, go ahead, test free agency, and he was off pretty quickly. So that was an easy one. With Milano,
free agent decisions are made by independent third parties in the simulation,
and I know
the moderators.
Yeah, we talked pre-show, so that there was a fair amount of things that, for anybody who's listening who does, fantasy football or fantasy sports, kind of the fab budget idea where you guys had tiers of bids, and then the bid could either be accepted, could be held off and tiered, and it would go down to your next one, and that could be accepted or moved on. So there was some risk for you guys as well that, hey, if you were close on your top tier and they decided to hold off, but your second choice accepted, that money's taken, and you've now signed that. So you guys had to be very strategic in what you were offering and whether those offers were going to be accepted. And I think that's similar. We see some of those, post off-season productions that the team at One Bills Drive do, where they put together and you have Joe Shane's off on the phone in this room with a guy and Brandon Bean's on the phone over here with another guy. And I think the one that always struck me was in 2019 where John Brown and Cole Beasley were both being negotiated with at the same time, and they didn't want either of them to know that they were negotiating with another wide receiver at the time because they were probably pitching both of them that they were going to be the number one target in the passing game. And it's funny how those things work. So I like the way that puts some stress on.
More of an active negotiation. So I will say everyone except, actually, I think all of the guys who we ended up re-signing did accept their initial offers. Feliciano did not accept his offer. We didn't offer him something new. And then the other one was Milano, who we negotiated with for a little bit. Our initial offer was, I believe, $446. He said no. We offered, I think we kept on going up by about $2 million in total money, and we got, I don't remember if we offered the 450, but that was about the limit that we got to, and he said he wanted 13.
So you guys were up at 11 and change, up to $12 million a year. Obviously, we'll get into this here in a moment. You guys had flexibility to do signing bonuses, option bonuses, structuring cap hits to be realistic. So some of these things didn't hit all at once just because it was $11 or $12 million a year. We'll talk about that with some of the bigger free agents you signed. But that was the way you approached Matt Milano, was a manageable year one offer starting at $11.5 million and then working your way up into 12 and change, but stop short of 13 million.
Yeah, that was basically at the point where we said it's too much and we're not going to be getting proper value out of him. Obviously, I absolutely love Matt Milano. I'm actually a Boston College grad, so I've had a soft spot for him since he was drafted. And I just absolutely love the guy, and I think he seems like a really cool person as well. And I'm not sure, obviously there's they can't be realistic to the individual person with this mock offseason, but it was sad to see him go, but we had to, go with our gut instead of with our heart there. Because, going with your heart is how you end up overpaying guys and losing your job. And I just got this job.
We just saw the amazing 2019 team that won the offseason with the Las Vegas Raiders, and that they literally are cutting loose every single guy that they signed that entire offseason. So before we dive into full onset of free agency and negotiating with other players, how did you have money to be able to sign these players? Did you guys have a function to renegotiate current contracts?
Yeah. So I'm sure people saw some of that when they first saw that sheet. They were trying to figure out, how did this all... this isn't realistic. It looks fancy, but you guys are just making all this up. But no, so the two main functions we had to create cap space were obviously cutting players and then restructures. Now, for some teams, it was much, much more complicated than it was for us. I would have to go. I'm actually kind of interested. I want to go and see how Philly and New Orleans pulled it off in this sim.
Atlanta, Pittsburgh, Dallas,
exactly.
some of those.
Yeah. But so we could have gone into things with more complex restructures, asking guys to take pay cuts, doing extensions, if we had wanted to really push the envelope more. And they set a limit at 5 simple restructures on Spot Rack, which is basically where you convert the salary to
the base salary to a signing bonus, spread it out over the life. The one where they have the little button that you can just do base salary restructure.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I'm so glad that they added that.
Yeah, it's a very nice function. For anyone who's not a premium user or doesn't mess with the SpotTrack website, they make it very, very easy to be able to do your own mock off season, not with 31 other franchises, but with the Bills.
No, exactly.
Okay. So just not every single one, but ballpark, how many of those did you do? How much cap space do you remember creating when you did that exercise?
Oh, yeah. So actually, I don't have the exact numbers, but in terms of right off the bat, what we did was we cut 3 players in Vernon Butler, Lee Smith, and Tyler Matakevich. The Matakevich is one who I could have done something about, restructuring, taking a pay cut, extending a year or something to try to keep him on. But it wasn't worth it for me to try to go through that finagling to, save the player, lose some space. And then the 4 restructures were Stephon Diggs, Tre'Davious White, Deion Dawkins, and Mitch Morse. The restructures created about $20 million in space, and the cuts created about an additional 10 to 15 or so. So we were sitting around 30 to 35 million in space after all of those moves, before factoring in the re-signings that I just talked about. It was closer to 25 million at that point, but I know that was the number that I had when I was create space, where I had gotten up to with my initial moves.
So Adam, I know Liam led much of that piece of it. Did that match up? Was there anything that you pushed back on wanting to be able to cut additional players, or guys that they were restructuring that you thought were dangerous to? Or, obviously I've seen other people, when you go through there's upwards of 10 people, you can restructure and do those things. Were you tempted to want to create more space along those lines?
I was fairly satisfied, I thought, with the choices. I mean, it was already pushing the envelope quite a bit to restructure so many.
I would say you guys leaned into the higher end of realistic. I don't think that you went overboard. I think that 3 or 4 releases, 3 or 4 restructures, 7 or 8 total transactions is something I could see is probably at the higher end of what we'll see, but I think that was still well within the range of realistic. So I thought you guys did well, probably controlling yourselves of where, on the show that Aaron and I did, we showed that in theory you can create $50 million of cap space.
Exactly.
If you lean into every single one of the moves. So I thought that you guys did well in not going overboard and being unrealistic in that sense.
Yeah.
So contract-wise, I felt that I was definitely kind of the angel on the shoulder advising against paying Milano in that particular one. I had some advice about. I mean, we chatted about every contract that we eventually offered, but yeah, Liam is the GM and made the final calls there.
No, it makes sense. So now let's dive in. We'll take a look at it here. Obviously, we already showed you guys re-signed Darrell Williams, brought back Isaiah McKenzie, Ike Botker, Levi Wallace, Matt Barkley, Dean Marlowe, Corey Bojorquez, Andre Smith, Delshon Phillips. But you also went in and added 5 additional free agents. So talk us through, obviously fans are now seeing the names here. When you went into this, what was your guys' strategy as far as, hey, we know if we're going to splurge, it's going to be here versus going to individual players? Were there any where you actually tried to go at a higher number at that position, but you didn't get the deal done, so then you dropped down? Or was it, hey, if we're going to splurge, it's going to be at pass rush? So Liam, what was your approach as you went in to this? And obviously your bigger expenditures were pass rush, cornerback, linebacker. Was that pretty intentional going into it?
So I would say pass rush and linebacker 100% were priority places to look at. With linebacker, because we lost Milano, that became a major priority. And I felt that regardless of, we didn't have any reagents re-signed at the end, but I felt that pass rush was 100% a need based on what I saw from the team this past year. And just the way that the NFL is trending, it really feels like getting pressure with your front four is maybe the most important thing that you can have on a team outside like an elite quarterback. It's like the defensive version of having an elite quarterback is getting pressure with 4. So that was 100% a priority. We had a handful of guys that we had offers lined up for, and to make sure that we got somebody that was going to be a contributor. That was also less so the case with cornerback, because I feel we had brought back Levi Wallace, and I felt okay with where he was at. And if we had to go with Levi Wallace and Dane Jackson competing for CB2, that would be fine. But I also saw an opportunity to take our secondary from being, I might even say that we have an elite secondary right now, but I feel that adding Richard Sherman as the second outside corner across from Tre'Davious White with the safeties we have, and then you have Teron Johnson in the slot,
plus retaining that might be Levi Wallace and having Dane Jackson is a great, obviously in the chat here, Lone Wolf asking why Richard Sherman. I think that anytime you're leaning into an older cornerback, having that safety net of guys like Levi Wallace and Dane Jackson mitigate the potential risk, because your worst case scenario is, it was a bad investment, but you're not obligated to keep giving them snaps because you have the fallback of a guy that pretty much what the floor is in Levi Wallace. So I don't hate some of those where, hey, I don't know that I love signing a 33-year-old cornerback, but he played really well when he was playing in San Francisco and was a Pro Bowler last year still. So I think some of those savvy veteran elements are worthwhile taking a stab at when you can mitigate the downside if the wheels do fall off.
Exactly.
I think that's the critical way to look at it is, at corner and also at linebacker, we've just given ourselves like multiple bites at the apple, where if any one of them works out, we're set. And we've got, at corner, we've got Wallace, we've got Sherman, we've got Dane Jackson. Linebacker, we have Klein, Kirksey, and a draft pick. And really, we only need like one of those corners and one of those linebackers to work, and we're set.
So talk to me a little bit here. I know in the Slack channel, Trey Hedrickson has been a often debated player, and I've poked at him in what I think is setting up to maybe be paid in a stance where I'm concerned he's going to produce at that level, but I think you mitigated much of that in the way that you structured this. So talk a little bit about your approach for, was pass rush a target? Who were some other names you went after, and what made Hendrickson one of your top targets?
Yeah, so the thing about Trey Hendrickson is that sorry,
I like it. It's my favorite comparison. I like it.
That was for you, Greg. The thing I like about Trey Hendrickson is that he strikes me as a guy that started to produce as his opportunities increased. I think a lot of people, I will say, I think his sack numbers in 2020 were inflated by, getting some cleanups and, just some lucky breaks. But I don't buy into the belief that he only succeeded this year or had those big numbers because of the talent around him on the the Saints D line, because that talent has been around him his whole career. I just think that he's a guy that, from what I've seen of him in film and from watching him, he seems like a polished technical pass rusher that has a good mix of speed and power. He definitely fits the culture. One big thing, big major key is after every sack, he did the whole point to the sky. So I know he's a big God guy. Definitely going to fit in the Sean McDermott culture.
And I will say, I poke at him a lot more so because I'm concerned he's going to get paid more than what you paid him. You were right there at where my cutoff is. We kind of did some comparisons of you got him at $11.5 million average. You were able to drop that down to only $6 million for the 2021 cap hit, which is really smart. And then we looked at what some of the other players were producing at that $11.5 million, and it's not unreasonable that's the area that he's at. I'm worried he gets paid more than that. And then you look at, it being fair with his production. If you're going to overproducing at 14.5 sacks that realistically probably should have been closer to 10 is a lot different than overproducing at 10 that should have been 5.
Exactly.
There is 10, more of a ceiling. Correct. There is more of a ceiling there that even if you take away some of the cleanup and coverage sacks there, it was still a pretty darn good season. So I will say that although I poke at it a lot, I think that there's some more upside there. And then again, when you mitigated it, the structure you had where it can be a 2-year deal if you need to get out of it, you're not married to a ton of this. I think that you're in halfway decent shape to be able to approach it. Talk to me about a player that I'm really excited about here. Bills fans know the talk about, going after a player last year in the big nickel in the draft. Everybody thought they were going to try to go after, trying to fit in a Jeremy Chin or whoever it happened to be. What made you target someone like Jaquiski Tartt and that kind of player coming out of San Francisco?
Honestly, Greg, it was hearing all the great things that you had to say about him.
Well, thank you. That is very.
I'll be frank. I don't know him that well as a player. I don't consider myself to be some football expert or anything. What I do think I do well is I take in information from others and try to prioritize the information I hear from the people that I trust the most. And everything that I've heard about Jaquiski Tartt is that he would fit in perfectly in our system as a utility player, as you described, a big nickel, a third safety, someone who can fill in for Hyde and Poyer in a pinch if they, we've seen them come out of games with injuries and before. I think he can be an upgrade on Dean Marlowe, might push Marlowe off the roster, although we know Marlowe's never going to miss the roster.
Roster cockroach. He's impossible to kill. No, and I think the way you described that is great. So one, I'm glad you enjoyed that show. Eric and I talked about him in our show. I talk about him a fair amount in the Slack channel. I think he's a player that offers a lot of versatility in what we're doing at hopefully the right price. I think he has some dime linebacker to him. I think that he has third safety options. He would be an upgrade over Marlowe if, God forbid, something to happen to Poyer or Hyde. He's the kind of player that could step in there, and he would genuinely allow for some big nickel options. So we joke about big nickel. I don't actually love the idea of taking Taron Johnson off the field. I want it on there as a dime player where you can have 3 corners and 3 safeties, but with a player like Tart, you're not losing a ton. So I also had brought up Keanu Neal as another player in a similar mold. So I really love the way that you approach that and give yourself some options going into the draft. Before we switch gears into the draft, was there anything as far as positions or players you went after that you were maybe disappointed you weren't able to get a deal done?
Just real quick, I want to say that the age of the big nickel is over. It's now the era of the thick dime.
That is right. You're darn right.
That is the terminology to spam now. Along with platoon, linebacker platoon. That's the other one.
Moneyball, cobbled together those snaps.
But in terms of guys that we swung on and missed, honestly, I think we were able to pretty much eventually get a guy at every position that we wanted. Sherman took a while to get in the building. He really stretched it out, and we had some other guys that we offered and had like a conditional acceptance, but we decided because I felt that we didn't need to add at cornerback, I felt it was okay to wait to see if we could get Sherman, because I really felt like he was going to be a strong addition. But it did really feel like positions that we wanted to add. So I would say offensive guard, I wish I had done better than Osemele, considering he might not have any ligaments in his knees left.
I will say I'll be a little surprised if he's still playing football this coming year, but we'll see. Obviously, we'll go through in this exercise assuming that he is. One of the folks here was asking about Nicholas Morrow, and he's a player that I was interested in. So was he a player that you had looked at targeting, or was Kirksey? I know. So as an example, Eric is a bigger fan of Kirksey. I had the coverage ability of Morrow, but I did kind of think that he was going to be cheaper than what it came in as. So you were right there in the same range. I think if I was asked, would I go Kirksey for $4.5 million or Morrow for $4 million, I would probably take Kirksey as well. So seeing that value, I thought you did well in that. Was he a consideration?
Morrow wasn't actually one of our considerations. KJ Wright was the other linebacker that we had sort of as our backup option. I think he went for, I don't know what his cap hit, but I think he was around $7 million. I don't know if they have it. Yeah, he might be listed as an inside linebacker.
Or maybe just linebacker.
Maybe linebacker.
I'll see where that ended up at.
Sir. Huh.
There is a spot for just adding linebacker. Yeah, I was a little surprised because I was looking for KJ Wright on here, but we'll move on to the next one.
They might have missed some names, but I remember seeing him in the Discord coming through that I think it was a 2-year, $14 million deal, which was about what we had offered him. Yeah. Or a little bit more.
Getting Kirksey for less than that, getting Kirksey for close to where Morrow was, I think, is a really solid job. I think that again, you're hoping to be able to snag somebody in the draft. Anytime you're in that mid-tier, you want to be able to pair him with somebody that you're bringing up there. So I know you handled a lot of the negotiations and free agency, and obviously we're very involved in the draft and making the final calls. I know Adam did a lot of the homework here. So as we transition into the draft, now seeing what took place in free agency, we now signed pretty close a 1-for-1 replacement for Matt Milano in Christian Kirksey. You had your cat's making a guest appearance on the show. Going through the process, you kept Darrell Williams. You added a couple options as far as a corner, so you don't have a huge pressing need there. Retaining Levi Wallace, adding Richard Sherman. You brought in a big nickel and a third safety in Jaquiski Tart. So what were some of your kind of goals now that it sounds like Liam kind of accomplished what your imperative for him was, that, hey, we don't want to go in with huge holes in the in the draft to force our hand. So were you pleased in the position you were in now, being able to pivot into the draft?
Of course, yeah. I knew that we needed a guard in the first 2-3 rounds, but I thought we had several identified, and I thought there was a pretty good chance the board would break for us and we could just solve it right away, and that's pretty much what happened.
Very good.
And beyond just addressing that one need, I thought we were in good position to just scoop up value and always just trust the board and draft best players. And,
so,
that's how, good teams are maintained.
100%. And I was really impressed going into it. You guys were asking some of the guys in the chat, some of the people who do our draft work, how to set it up. You guys had a board that I thought was really clean. And, some of the do not draft lists were high rated guys who just aren't fits in our scheme. Then guys who you targeted to go in the mid first, then later first, early second, and going through here, you kind of had it tiered in a way that I think many teams tier their structure. And
Yep.
Obviously, I've warned everyone, I don't think this year's draft is going to be nearly as predictable as what it did, but you guys ended up kind of pegging your first 20 picks were the top 20 guys you had rated. So at minimum, there weren't a ton of shocks early on, but then like I think we will see in the real draft, you had a lot of movement, you had a lot of trades, and then you had some surprise picks later in the first round. So although we're not going to go into how the Texans were second and the Patriots were third and all the different trades that took place here, what was it like watching some of these quarterback hungry teams go what looks like pretty crazy at the top of this draft?
Go ahead.
Relaxing.
That's a perfect answer. It's so nice being in, now no longer in quarterback purgatory and letting everybody else chase after this. I will say, I don't know that the teams are the way that this is going to end up falling, but I thought the players were pretty well paced out. I don't think that 4 quarterbacks at the top of the draft is out of the question. Then you see most of the names that we expect to see going through here. As we went down through here and you start getting to, obviously, I don't know that Mac Jones makes it all the way down to 20. I don't know that Tyson Campbell or Creed Humphrey end up in the first round. But, we have teams here that know their franchise as well, what their holes were. As we got down here close to where the Bills are about to pick, how did you feel like the board was lining up with those needs that you had?
I'll speak to that real quickly. I was seriously considering trying to move up for Vera Tucker into the mid 20s. I had a deal worked out with, I believe Pittsburgh was at 25 or 20 or 24, somewhere in that mid 20s. They obviously 24. Moved around, but I had a deal worked out with them. But enough guys were also coming down that were similar to Vera Tucker that I decided to stay put, and it worked out pretty well for us. But there was definitely seeing Morrow was a guy that I was absolutely in love with, and is if we like another guy who I would have considered trading up to. Like if he was there at 24, I might have gone up to get him, even though we kind of needed the guard just because he's such a special talent. Go ahead.
No, so Adam, looking at some of the other names that we see here, Dylan Radins, Ifedi Melifonwu, Tevin Jenkins, Pat Freiermuth, some of the names that people see mocked to the Bills. What was it like debating some of those, and maybe even some positions that are a higher premium, like offensive tackle, like pass rusher? What was it like debating that versus, I think that you guys got the perfect marriage of best player available, and in your guys' offseason position of need, guard isn't always a player that you're targeting in the first round. I think Vera Tucker can play tackle in the NFL. I think that he has a ton of value and can be a dominant guard. And obviously not bringing back Feliciano, retaining Darrell Williams, having a chance to plug him in there, I think this is a perfect fit. Were you tempted to lean more into the position premium philosophy that often will dictate a lot of people's drafts?
I do support the positional value theory. I usually lean that way.
Likewise.
On the draft board, we had 4 players that were worth this pick in the late first, and they were all available. I guess what really did it is that the way free agency shook out, this was the clear need, and we're not sure what kind of guards will be available at the later picks. So, my advice to Liam leading up to the pick was that because we had several players worth the pick, we should just hold tight, and we did. And we got lucky that Vera Tucker made it to us.
No, very good. And I think that approach made a lot of sense. And obviously there, where one of the other, most frequently mock positions, you see, obviously a player like Najee Harris goes right afterwards. You see him mocked to the Bills a lot, and a player that some people think could be special. I again don't love running back in the first round, but I get having a special talent like him available there also. So again, I brought up Pat Freiermuth. You look at Nick Bolton, some players like that. So obviously some positions that may have been calling to it. As you then see the second round, every time I do a mock draft, it kind of kills my heart seeing just like this one went. So you see Bolton, you see Freiermuth, you see Tevin Jenkins, Landon Dickerson, Jabril Cox, Hamza Nasruddin, Afedi Melifonwu, Kadarius Toney, Dylan Radins, all those players, Alex Leatherwood, Wyatt Davis, everybody coming off the board. As it's coming down to the Bills' pick here, what is your mindset here of what you're targeting? We'll start with Adam. What were you hoping would fall from a position standpoint, and were some of those names I just rattled off kind of painful to see coming off the board?
Of course, yeah. I mean, I've done so many mock drafts. I think I've picked all of those players at least once. But I mean, it's a sharp Discord. Everyone else is enthusiastic and informed, just like we are. And, it's to be expected that all these names are going to fly off the board. So as I mentioned before, the way we set up the draft board and the way we set ourselves up in free agency, we had our tiers, and we're going to stick to it and just get good value. And once we had addressed guard, I mean, from my perspective, we could be very ideological. Like, I would have drafted a receiver, even though we don't need any. I would have drafted a tackle, even though we don't really need any, having re-signed Williams. But the way the board fell, we obviously picked Etienne, which is another example of, I mean, I'm in the camp that we don't technically need a running back. And I don't it doesn't feel good to kind of put the previous running back picks to waste, but he's really good and the value is insane.
So I think I told Liam when we talked about this that I would try my hardest to poo-poo a running back in the top 2 rounds. But if you tell me Travis Etienne is available at pick 61, I'm just going to go watch his highlight reel and talk myself into how great of a pick that is. So,
exactly.
Getting a first-round talent at the end of the second round, who I think could be integrated as an offensive weapon kind of position. You talk about that's the kind of guy that you could probably put out in the slot and give some jet sweeps to. You can run the screen game to, game-breaking ability, maybe even kick returner to have an ability to start early on. I think that is a true best player available. You kind of throw your hands up. It's really hard pressed. I looked at this in prep for the show. There are names of other players. I like Brevin Jordan. I like Quinn Miners. I like Elijah Moore. I like Jamin Davis. Those are players that I like. I can't make any straight-faced argument that they're a better prospect than Travis Etienne if you're going to get him. And I think, honestly, when you go through these kind of exercises in today's modern NFL, we saw this last year. We saw running backs drop, and we saw that it waited a long time before we even saw some premium talents like J.K. Dobbins and Jonathan Taylor, and those guys went later than many people expected. And I know that from a fantasy standpoint, people see those names with Najee Harris and Travis Etienne and Javonte Williams. I think they get thrown around a lot, but it's just, I think some teams are starting to lean into that more. I don't think it's crazy that one of those elite talents could be there in the second round. And I don't know that it will, if things fell a little bit differently and Alex Leatherwood or Dylan Radins or Kadarius Toney or Afedi Melifonwu, if one of those guys are there, along with Etienne, maybe he continues to fall and they pick one of those guys instead. But with the way this board fell, it was really hard to pick out another player that was obviously above there. So, Adam, what was maybe another position you were targeting there if you were going to go another direction besides recommending Etienne, which, again, you followed your board and trusted it? What was another position you were targeting?
That's totally based on the board. So it was a variety of positions. I believe this is just from memory, but I think we had Perkins, we had Jamin Davis, we had Robinson, the corner. I was willing to draft any of them for the reasons I stated. That
why did you not pick Tyler Shelvin? Because you hate me.
First of all, he was in the next tier down, so
all right. We'll trust the board. As you were moving through here, obviously you mentioned Jamin Davis. We talked about the earlier picks in looking at a Jabril Cox or Nick Bolton or some of those different players. I was really impressed with the value in both the second and your third round pick. So you see the board fall in the way that it does here. Getting Baron Browning at the end of the third round, and the fact that you walked away with an offensive playmaker and a impactful day one starter on the offensive line, and then get your future linebacker there to pair with Christian Kirksey. I don't know that this could have fallen much better than what it did. So Liam, what was your thoughts as you were getting to this spot? Were there any other considerations? I thought he was a pretty obvious pick when you got to that point. What were some other options that you were looking at?
Sure. So I will definitely say that Browning was sticking out on the board. I'm pretty sure he was the only name left in his tier, which I think was late second. So he was definitely sticking out. The only other name that I was really taking pause at potentially taking instead of him is actually the very next name that came off the board in Hunter Long. Another, as I had mentioned, I'm a BC guy, so I think
I was going to give you a hard time.
This was a good exercise for me to control my separate personal bias, because I watched Hunter Long absolutely. Yeah, I think he led the nation in receptions and yards as a tight end this year for BC. So passing on that was tough, but I trusted Adam, who had put Browning that high on the board. I did not know him that well before this process started, but I was looking at him and trying to get a good sort of understanding of him as a player as we were approaching, and I've seen that he was still sticking out. And yeah, the value was just way too good, even if Hunter Long was another guy that I wanted to add to boost up the tight end room a little bit.
Very good. So as we go through here, we're not going to go through every single one of the rest of the picks, but I see that you guys made a trade going into the fourth round. How did you end up getting that fourth round pick, and did the Hunter Long pick kind of influence that?
100%. So I would say this was like the last major impactful pick of the draft. After Hunter Long left, there was basically Tommy Tremble and McKitty, whose first name is escaping me, from Georgia, were the only tight ends that we had left on our board that we thought had like an early day 3 grade. And just looking back at the roster, I sort of had an oh crap moment. Like, we're basically just running it back with Dawson Knox, and that's it. So I felt like I really needed to add something there, and I was able to work out a deal with the Raiders. Depending on the draft chart, was who won the trade. I tend to use the Rich Hill chart.
I think that's a good one, more realistic of modern values.
But I sent both of our 5th rounders and our 6th rounder next year to get up to 121, and took Tommy Tremble, who any Cover One fan should be familiar with him after watching that awesome video Eric posted of him just stealing people's souls in the blocking.
Yeah, and I think he's a guy that is basically a Reggie Gilliam souped up version. Like, he's what Gilliam was kind of brought in to be, but is much higher end talent there that can do some things on special teams, but can be an H-back move tight end and can do things. He's probably not a long-term maybe inline hand in the dirt guy. He's more of a movable weapon, but can really push Dawson Knox for that view, in my opinion, to be able to go through there. So as we look through all the work that you guys ended up doing here in the draft, we'll go eventually you guys did make a couple more picks that went through and ended up bringing in Josh Ball, a developmental offensive tackle, as well as Jordan Scott, obviously making some of the other trades that you guys did. And then I also went into some UDFAs and some names that people may recognize. You guys ended up being able to bring in a handful of players here on.
You had it right.
The tab. Where
Right.
is it
Just
at?
scroll
Yeah,
right.
this one.
Oh, there we go, on the graphic.
Yeah, it's the Bill specific one. There you go.
Yeah,
Yep.
so the CJ Maribel, a player that the team went after, or that our team went and did some review on out of Coastal Carolina, kind of an overall weapon out of the backfield, and probably honestly like a discount version of Travis Etienne, so it's interesting there. Another offensive tackle in Jalen Moore, and an actual inline tight end, Luke Farrell, who is kind of a Hayden Hurst model, actually played professional baseball, and then now is coming out into the draft already at like 29 years old or something crazy. So being able to be in that setup, I thought you came away really well in the draft, and now, let's talk through a little bit about what this set up in your view of the depth chart of what it puts together. I think now having a backfield, Travis Etienne, Devin Singletary, Zach Moss, I think you really solidified the line pretty well, retaining Darrell Williams, adding in a first-round pick like Elijah Vera Tucker, keeping Deion Dawkins and Mitch Morse, adding Kelechi Osemele as kind of an option to mentor Cody Ford and to step in if needed, keeping some of the depth in Ike Botker. Maybe a little bit of question at swing tackle with Trey Adams and Josh Ball, I think was an area. Was there anything else that stood out on offense of what the overall roster ended up looking like? We'll start with Liam.
Sure. So first I'll address swing tackle because I feel that is probably the weak point on the offense. The one thing that makes me feel a little bit better about where our swing tackles are at is that both of our guards have experience bumping outside. So if, say, something happens long-term to Deion Dawkins, as much as I would prefer to keep Vera Tucker on the inside, probably I feel good, like maybe for, the end of the season, if we have to bump Vera Tucker outside and bring Botker in, or vice versa, if Darrell Williams goes down and we have to bump Cody Ford out to right tackle and bring Botker in. Having Botker as that emergency, as not even emergency, we know that he has starting experience and is a solid floor. So if he's like the sixth offensive lineman in, we can sort of make do. Elsewhere on the offense, I was considering maybe bringing in and trying to find an upgrade on McKenzie. If we could get a better, gadget, returner, speed option. But we weren't able to do that. But I'm okay with that. But other than that, I feel like pretty good about the offense.
Very good. So, Adam, what were your thoughts? You're going through, obviously, the defense needed some injection of talent. So, replacing Kirksey with a combination of Kirksey, Browning, and even Jaquiski Tart together, kind of replacing Matt Milano's reps, getting an upgrade for Addison in Trey Hendrickson, being able to retain some players like Quentin Jefferson, bringing A.J. Epinesa along. How did you feel like the defense came together versus where your vision was going into the offseason?
Yeah, I think it came together pretty well. We were using the word platoon earlier, and I think we've got a good mix of vets and rookies that can grow into roles. I think the only place where, maybe we didn't get a lot better is outside corner, but I think it's probably good enough to hold it down this year. And I mean, I think every single year that McDermott's been here, outside corner 2 has been like some guy.
Bubblegum and duct tape.
Right. And they've proven it out that the scheme works pretty well most of the time under those circumstances. Although we saw kind of what happened when we ran into Kansas City with that setup.
So I'll say, for Liam, the approach that you guys had, I like the platoon word that Adam used, being able to go in. You look at where if there is a drop off for Richard Sherman, having Levi Wallace and Dane Jackson is a really strong way to mitigate that. If Christian Kirksey can't come back to the performance he had when he was with the Browns, and we see more struggles like he had recently, you have AJ Klein still there. You're able to bring in Baron Brown and to move him along more quickly. If you see that you need more from a guy like AJ Epinesa being able to step up, you're not putting all your eggs in that basket. So I thought the way that this turned out was really strong in the use of resources, not being unrealistic in the investments that you had, and being able to put together what I think is a really strong roster and depth chart. What were your thoughts on the defensive side of the ball?
Sure. Yeah, I think with the linebacker and that, the way I envision it is basically you have Tremaine Edmonds on the field for 100% of the snaps, and then you have Teron Johnson on the field for probably 70-80% of snaps as the nickel, and then the rest, the other 120% of linebacker, 130% of linebacker snaps, you basically break down between, playing with two linebackers, if that's Kirksey or Browning, or even Dodson, if you're playing with just Edmonds as the linebacker and you have Teron Johnson out there. If you have big sets where you have AJ Klein in there as well, we have plenty of options there to, have plurality and see either, who's playing well or how we want to match up against certain opposition. So I really like that. And as you said, having depth options and people that can potentially push forward, sort of a weird little edge case, pun intended, is like the fourth defensive end position. Daryl Johnson has been holding that down, but we have a handful of guys behind him that I feel like every offseason are just banging down the door trying to get onto the roster. Mike Love especially. Every time I've seen him in the offseason, it feels like he's a guy that he could probably get on the roster and he could contribute somewhere, but he keeps ending up on our practice squad. So just having as much options as possible to fill holes where we don't have a clear superstar. So we have Edmonds who can play 100% of the snaps, but around him we have people who can fill those roles, and we can sort of put people where they are in a best place to succeed.
So you guys are getting some love in the chat here, and obviously I agree. I think that you guys went in with a solid plan. You guys had a strong approach of how you wanted to do things. I think that you mirrored much of what Brandon Beane approaches to things, whether that's being able to go through and have, trying to fill as many holes as possible, not inviting drafting by need. And I think that approach made sense and netted out. So I think you guys represented Bills Mafia really well and should be proud of the work that you did.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Trey.
So any final takeaways from what this exercise showed? Obviously, I had a lot of guys asking some good questions on how you created the cap space. And for anybody who's just joining now, go back and listen to the beginning. Lots of really good talk on retaining and re-signing players, how you approach some of the tenders with, keeping some of the RFA players, how the negotiating worked back and forth, being able to create cap space, and then the model of going through with all the teams making draft choices. So anybody just joining now, please go back and check those things out. I thought you guys did a lot of the prep for it. Any final takeaways of what you learned going through this? We'll start with Adam. Either moves that you wish you had done differently or things you would have approached next time. What were maybe just any takeaways or final thoughts on being able to be part of this?
This is going to sound silly, but next time maybe we would need to scope out the general chat channels more thoroughly. Because it is a community. They talk about the draft constantly in there, and they influence each other, right? They exert gravity. One person will post their rating of a player, and if it's way outside of what people currently think, the other people kind of follow along if that person's a respected person. So you can definitely get an idea of what the group is thinking, and you can use that to maximize the returns on your draft board, for instance.
And what I'll say with that actually is that's pretty realistic to how it actually works in the NFL. I feel like you see a lot of, it'll be less so this year because you don't have teams and agents and scouts and GMs going to the combine, but the group think is a much more significant element than, obviously it's huge in the draft, the online, community, the draft analyst community. And it's less so in the NFL, but it still is something that exists, definitely.
Well, and I'll give examples of it. It's not necessarily, here we have things like, that's not the way that would work on the PFF mock draft simulator, or hey, that's not where they have them ranked in the Draft Network top 100 board. And those things are real. Those guys are smart people who do their homework and do those things for a reason. And people in online social media get strongly influenced by those, right, wrong, or indifferent. They're not good or bad. It's just easily over-influenced by it. The way it happens in the pros is, oh, hey, I'm here at Lenore Rhine, and I thought I was the only scout here, and I see 3 scouts for another team here. I didn't know that you knew about Kyle Duggar. Those are the kind of things that happen in the pros where all of a sudden you're like, oh, I've seen you at 3 different Western Kentucky games here. I didn't realize you guys were in on this. And it's funny where it's a lot more clandestine. It's a lot more, the kind of game theory approach of, wait, what are they thinking? And how do I need to stay ahead of that? And it's going to be super interesting this year where, free agency is going to be super weird because, regardless of what they say about the tampering period starting March 15th, the tampering period starts at the combine. And it's in the hotel rooms and the bars and the restaurants around Indianapolis. And half of those deals that get hammered out are already 90% done in the approach to, leading up to the actual tampering period when they get finalized and announced. And the same way that I think last year, Trent Brown's deal, or 2 years ago, Trent Brown's deal was announced like 8 minutes after the legal tampering period started. I have a feeling they didn't negotiate that deal in 8 minutes.
The key word is legal tampering period.
Correct. Yeah, what you can prove. So it's going to be super interesting to see it this year. So I really enjoyed this. Again, I've enjoyed getting to know you guys in the Cover One Slack channel. So for anybody listening, come on, check us out over on the Cover One Slack channel. I've also gotten a chance to get to know some of the guys over on the Reddit boards. I haven't had a chance to spend a ton of time in the mock draft or in the NFL draft subreddit, but certainly with the guys in the Buffalo Bills subreddit has been a ton of fun. And I know they're going to be checking out the show here tonight. So just want to give a shout out to the team over there and everybody who's been so supportive of us as well. Liam, Adam, I honestly, I thought you guys did a great job. Got a ton of support here in the chat. You guys did a really nice job with this. I'd love to give you a harder time, but I think you put together a heck of a roster.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, appreciate it, guys. For everybody here, check us out later on this week. We are going to do a roundtable on Thursday night. It's going to be myself and Aaron welcoming Sterling from The Hoof and Anthony from Disguise Coverage. We are going to go through with our kind of target wish list at each of the premium spots that we're going after. We're going to have our high level expenditure value guy and mid-range person at cornerback, pass rusher, linebacker, offensive tackle, each of the key positions going into free agency, and give you one last shot to kind of poke around and see what our options are as we get into everything. And next Monday it is going to start hot and heavy. I think we're going to see a lot more news this week. We saw a lot of things today with the Dak Prescott signing, with all of the different releases that are happening, the Isaiah Wilson trade. I think that we're going to see multiple additional moves happening this week with a lot more releases coming hot and heavy as we get towards the end of the week. Every NFL team has to be under the salary cap by next Wednesday at 4 p.m. And obviously they're going to want to make more room than that to be able to sign free agents. So get ready for a lot of news. Stick with us here at Cover One. You have been listening to Cover One Buffalo, and we are out.